Hello, everyone. This is Eleanor Rigby. I was looking through a dusty shoebox in the attic this morning, and I came across a small yellowed scrap of lace. It's not from a grand gown or a designer veil. It's just a bit of trim from a simple cotton dress I wore on a Tuesday afternoon in 1964. Looking at it now, with my hands a little shakier than they used to be, I realized that if I had listened to what the world wanted back then, if I had insisted on the spectacle instead of the soul, I might have missed the very foundation of my life. Time has a way of blurring the edges of our memories, but that day is as sharp as a diamond in my mind. I wanted to share this with you because I see so many young people today losing their way before they even get to the altar. If I hadn't learned the lesson of that simple day, I honestly don't know if we would have made it through the storms that came later. Before I tell you this story, please subscribe. I want to pass this wisdom down before I'm gone, so you don't make the same mistakes I see so many making today. You'll have to understand, back in the early 60s, things were changing, but the expectations for a young woman were still very much set in stone. My mother had saved for years. She had this vision of me in a cathedral with hundreds of guests and a cake tall enough to reach the rafters. She wanted the heavy satin, the bridesmaids in matching tulle, and a reception that would be talked about in our town for a decade. But when Arthur asked me to marry him, we were sitting on a park bench, sharing a single soda, because that's all we could afford, after he'd paid his rent. He looked at me with those earnest eyes and said, "Eleanor, I can give you a kingdom, but I can give you my life. Can we just start it now?" We didn't have a penny to our names. Truly, Arthur was working at the pharmacy, and I was teaching piano to neighborhood children. When I told my mother we wanted to get married at the courthouse, with just our siblings as witnesses, she cried for 3 days. She said it was scandalous. She said people would think we had to get married, if you catch my drift. But I knew. I felt it in my bones. I didn't want to start our life together in debt for the sake of a party for people I didn't even like. I can still hear her voice, sharp and worried, saying, "Eleanor, you'll regret this every time you look at someone else's photos. You're throwing away your one big day." I remember looking at her and saying, "Mom, I don't want a big day. I want a big life." On the morning of our wedding, there was no hairstylist, no makeup artist, no fleet of cars. I put on that simple white cotton dress, the one with the lace trim I found today, and I did my own hair in the mirror of my childhood bedroom. My heart was pounding, not because I was nervous about the ceremony, but because I was so incredibly ready to be his wife. Arthur met me at the courthouse steps. He was wearing a suit that was a little too short in the sleeves, holding a small bunch of daisies he'd picked up from a side street vendor for 50 cents. We stood before the justice of the peace. The room smelled of old paper and floor wax. It wasn't romantic in the way you see in the movies. There was a man waiting behind us to pay a traffic ticket. But when Arthur took my hand, and I felt the callus on his thumb from his hard work, the whole world went silent. When we said those vows, we weren't saying them to a crowd of 500 people. We were saying them to each other. There was no pressure to perform. There was no worrying about whether the flowers were wilting or if the salmon was cold. It was just two souls, bare and honest, making a promise in a quiet room. Afterward, we went to a little diner around the corner. We sat in a vinyl booth that had a tear in the seat. We ordered burgers and shared a piece of cherry pie. That was our wedding feast. I remember laughing so hard because Arthur got a bit of pie crust stuck on his chin, and he looked at me and said, "Well, Mistress Rigby, we did it. We're broke, but we're together." Young people today might not understand this, but there was a profound freedom in having nothing but each other. We didn't have the burden of expectations. We didn't have a perfect image to maintain. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest year of my life, that first one. We lived in a tiny apartment where the heater hissed and the windows rattled every time a truck went by. If we had spent $5,000 on a wedding, which was a fortune then, we would have been drowning. Instead, we had a small cushion of savings that kept us afloat when Arthur got sick that winter. I think about that often. If we had chosen the party over the peace of mind, the stress of those early bills might have snapped us in two. I've seen so many marriages start with a bang and end with a whimper because they spent all their energy on the I do and had nothing left for the I will. We had our struggles, believe me. We had nights where we sat at the kitchen table and argued about how we were going to make the rent. We had moments of doubt, but every time things got hard, I would think back to that quiet courthouse and that cherry pie. I would remember that our marriage wasn't built on a foundation of silk and expensive champagne. It was built on a Tuesday afternoon and a promise made in a dusty room. I can still hear the sound of the rain on the window of that diner. It started pouring while we were eating our pie. We didn't have an umbrella. We had to run 3 blocks to the bus stop, soaked to the bone, laughing like children. My dress was ruined, sticking to my skin, and my hair was a disaster. But I have never felt more beautiful than I did in that moment, shivering under Arthur's coat at the bus stop. Experience has taught me that the size of the wedding is often inversely proportional to the strength of the marriage. When you strip away the fluff, the fancy invitations, and the choreographed dances, what are you left with? You're left with a person. And if you need all those distractions to feel like your union is special, then you might need to look closer at the person standing across from you. You have to understand, the world is going to try to sell you a version of happiness that fits in a photograph. And they want you to believe that if you don't have the perfect venue or the most expensive ring, your love is somehow less than. Let me tell you the truth. Your love is found in the quiet moments. It's found in the way he looks at you when you're sick, or the way she stays by your side when you lose your job. It's not found in a ballroom. In all my 80 years, I have never once looked back and wished I'd had a bigger cake. I have never regretted the fact that my wedding photos are just 3 grainy black and full white snapshots taken by Arthur's brother. What I cherish is the 55 years of mornings that followed. I cherish the way we built a life, brick by brick, without the weight of debt, or the vanity of trying to impress neighbors we wouldn't even know 5 years later. Young people, listen to an old woman who has seen the seasons turn more times than she can count. Patience is not just waiting. It's the way you behave while you're waiting. Sacrifice isn't losing yourself. It's choosing us over me. And loyalty is the quiet thread that holds the whole tapestry together. We stayed married because we decided to every single day. We didn't have a grand start, so we had to work for a grand finish. Think about that. Think about what you are truly building. Are you building an event, or are you building a home? An event lasts 6 hours. A home is meant to last a lifetime. I promise you, when you get to my age, you won't care about the color of the napkins at your reception. You will care about whose hand is holding yours when the lights start to dim. I wish for you a love that doesn't need a stage. I wish for you the courage to be simple, to be vulnerable, and to be wise enough to know the difference between a celebration and a commitment. If you choose the person over the pageantry, you are already ahead of the game. Our little courthouse wedding was the best decision we ever made because it focused our hearts on the only thing that mattered, the journey, not the departure. Life is short, but it is wide. Don't spend the best of it trying to buy a memory that hasn't happened yet. Build your foundation on the solid ground of truth and thrift, and you'll find that the house you build together can withstand any storm. Thanks for listening to An Old Soul. Subscribe, share this with someone you love, and cherish them while they are here. I'll see you next time.